We are in this together.
The restaurant of the summer of 2020 is right here.
The murder itself was just jaw-dropping.
Welcome to Your World by Bloomberg QuickTake. I'm Jennifer in Los Angeles.
And I'm Kurumi in Tokyo.
Fashion lovers in Africa are combining style with safety during the coronavirus pandemic.
In Johannesburg, the trend is proving a boon to designers.
If you're gonna wear a mask, why not do it fashionably? Everybody has just ran with this idea. Every designer, I can't think of any designer who's not doing a mask at the moment in South Africa. Hi, my name is Gilebogile Foko. I've only started designing 2 years ago, which is something that I've always wanted to do. My personal style, I am more inspired or is more influenced by everything around Africa, which is bold, the prints, and really being out there and being visible, not being scared to show who we really are. We used to have clothes that have matching dukes, and people loved it, you know. And when the pandemic hit, we started making matching masks and saying, why not make it fashionable? Pre-pandemic, we were just ready, you know, to welcome our customers, but all of that changed and we had to innovate. Everybody wants masks. For instance, when people are slowly going back to work and companies are actually looking for people who can supply them with masks. That's what really makes us designers busy, and the schools also. So what I like about working in this area is we have such a beautiful fashion community. It's so easy to find seamstresses, it's so easy to collaborate with other designers, and it's so easy to just come up with events that we can inspire each other. So Shosho is a South African original dyed fabric that we used mostly for wedding gowns. My favorite part of being a designer would be choosing the fabrics, like the fabrics that we are sourcing from our neighboring countries, which is Ankara print. I just love how they've played with the designs, and you know, just looking at those designs, they tell a story. We are in Yeovil, Johannesburg at Frida Hartley, and we are here to donate 30 masks.
Women that come here, either they are victims of gender-based violence or they just find themselves destitute in Joburg.
I choose to cater to that audience because I feel that after wearing my stuff, they would be empowered, they would be confident in their own skin, and they would just be telling a story that I'm an African. I have been affected. I have close friends, I have family members who have contracted the virus. I do not take it light. I do not take it for granted. We are in this together. We're gonna get out of this together. Wear a mask at all times. That is the only way you can help the next person.
New Yorkers can now get food delivered directly to where they're seated in Central Park, thanks to this entrepreneur.
Is it warm? It's warm. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. Sure. The restaurant of the summer of 2020 is right here, Park. I'm the founder of Picnic Post. You can actually place a pickup order through whatever application or website that you usually use. And what we help you with is to get that food delivered to you wherever you happen to be sitting in the park. Come to picnic-post.com, just click request delivery, and there's just a little form with some information about the pickup. And I'll pick it up for you, and I'll find you wherever you are in the park and just drop off your food right there. There's a button on the website which just says share location, and that drops a pin for me so I can just find where they are in the park and drop off their food. It's usually people who have been in the park for a couple hours, got hungry again, had food but decided they want an ice cream, decided they want a smoothie.
This is a great option because it allows people to just conveniently get food instead of, traveling to several different places, which is hard these days.
When I came out here trying to start up this company and do this job, I found that in one day, I would interact with more people than I had interacted with in the previous 3 months combined. And that was just super exciting, fun feeling just to see tons of different faces, tons of different smiling faces. There's been something really exciting about just getting down to the sort of the grassroots of actual human interaction, customer interaction.
In Russia, LGBT couples say they're now facing greater legislative prejudice after the July 1st referendum defined marriage as a union solely between a man and a woman. Next up, we travel to St. Petersburg to hear one couple's story.
Да, наверное, получается так, что вроде как бы мы и не скрываем, но при всем при этом, да, мы не ходим на каждом шагу и не говорим, мы там гей-семья, да, и вот у нас ребенок. Нет, мы ведем себя просто, как обычная нормальная семья. Не афишируя, не выставляя на показ этого, но и не скрывая. Я планировала этого ребенка. Мы прошли весь путь беременности, родов. И сейчас я принимаю там 100-200% воспитания этого ребенка. И я воспринимаю его как своего, несмотря на то, что я его не рожала. Вот, и поэтому я считаю, что я имею право иметь такие же права, как и другие семьи традиционные.
Люди имеют право жить так, как они хотят. Просто ведь вопрос в чем? Что они же не просто живут так, как они хотят, а они хотят это демонстративно, нарочито, так сказать, с особым вкусом, кайфом эти права заявлять публично. Вот этого не будет.
Я хочу, чтобы вокруг люди, которые думают, что таких семей не существует, все-таки увидели, что мы существуем, и у нас полноценная семья, и у нас прекрасный ребенок, и чтобы они приняли этот факт, что такие семьи есть, и мы не боимся жить, и мы не собираемся прятаться, потому что мы такие же люди, и хотим, чтобы у нас были такие же права.
WHO has always advised that travel measures should be used in conjunction with other measures. By themselves, travel measures are not effective in dealing with the movement of disease. In the same way that hand washing alone or mask wearing alone or any of the public health interventions alone is not effective. In terms of right now where we stand in a pandemic, in a sense, the virus is everywhere. So the virus will move when the virus gets the opportunity to move, and that doesn't matter whether it's within countries or between countries. The fact is the virus is pretty much everywhere and it can move between areas.
Stephen Lawrence was murdered because he was black.
Few crimes in recent times have had such a profound or long-lasting impact.
Injustice, watershed, landmark are all used to describe the Lawrence case.
The thing that makes Lawrence particularly important, and why I think the Stephen Lawrence case is the case that is apparently changed the nation, is because it hinges on something else. So the murder itself was just jaw-dropping, and nobody could grasp that. But what followed was just beyond anybody's imagination. I remember the Stephen Lawrence case very well. It was the day before my daughter's birthday, so it was the 22nd of April 1993, and I remember it extremely well. It's hard to describe it in any other way as just almost sport. I suspect for an American audience you would be able to really relate to this, and perhaps this is why it was so shocking, because although it wasn't in any sense a kind of, a down south Mississippi lynching, it wasn't far off.
This is the bus stop where Stephen Lawrence was brutally stabbed to death in a savage racial attack. Today the bus stop's being changed, there are even new benches, but it does nothing to diminish the fact that this point represents the very worst in British race relations.
You had two boys, Stephen and his friend, who were at a bus stop in southeast London one evening, and they were part of an absolutely unprovoked attack where one of the boys managed to escape, Stephen sadly didn't, and 5 young white men murdered him. And as we discovered as the story unfolds, and the press and the media were able to get behind the story of Stephen's murderers, these people had practiced these kinds of assaults and killings in their bedrooms, and also it was just the most extraordinary thing. And it was the premeditated nature of it that I think people found so very, very difficult.
In the days following Stephen's murder, the police received several tip-offs, and all sources pointed to the same 5 suspects. Brothers Neil and Jamie are caught, Gary Dobson, Luke Knight, and David Norris.
Their gang were named 26 times as Stephen Lawrence's killers in the hours following his murder.
Lawrence handed in her own list of suspects, only to see the officer first fold it up and then screw it into a ball in front of her.
The Met's failure to respond to initial reports would prove to be the first in a string of injustices against the Lawrence family that spanned more than 2 decades. A couple of weeks later, and still no arrests, the Lawrence family had a press conference airing their frustrations that not enough was being done to catch the killers. 2 days later, they met with Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela paused on a visit to Britain to publicly shake the Lawrences' hands. In private, they talked, he listened, when no one in authority would.
We are very used to this type of thing where life is regarded as cheap in South Africa. But nevertheless, it's a sense of deep concern that it should happen in a country like Britain.
So we had these 2 huge problems. We had this issue of a young man in a London street who could be murdered, but in addition to the murder, we were confronted with this extraordinary notion of the ineptitude of the police inquiry that was motivated by race.
It's a racist society, that it doesn't matter, as for a black person that is, it doesn't matter what standard of life you try to achieve for yourself, it makes no difference in cases like this. You are treated as if you're a criminal right from the start.
In 1994, a year after the murder, covert video filmed by the police over several days in one of the suspects' apartments showed the gang using knives and making violent, racist remarks. With the investigation going nowhere and a growing sense that the system had failed them, Stephen's parents took matters into their own hands.
In 1996, Doreen and Neville Lawrence took out a private prosecution against 3 suspects.
This was the first private prosecution for murder in the UK for more than a century. But the Lawrences would once again leave without justice.
The judge directed the jury to return not guilty verdicts. Identification evidence was ruled inadmissible, and there was not enough other evidence to justify the prosecution.
The 3 suspects were acquitted, and the entering of not guilty verdicts meant they could not be tried again.
I think one of the things that makes the racism argument such an interesting one is that there is a difference, I think, between individual racism and institutional racism. So, and I think that most people would be askance at the idea of being accused of being racist, but because we live so comfortably in a racist system, it's difficult to reconcile those 2 points, because self-evidently the system is racist.
In 1997, the Lawrence family registered a formal complaint with the Police Complaints Authority about the Met's handling of the investigation. Soon after, the Daily Mail, a national newspaper, ran a front page accusing the men of killing Lawrence and challenging them to sue for libel.
I think the Daily Mail's involvement was really very surprising. If you think about the Daily Mail's the sort of Fox News of the UK broadcasting environment. And this was very much a CNN story, if you like, if I can put it that way for you. And the fact that it was actually Fox News in the form of the Daily Mail that went to bat on this and actually published the extraordinary headline, "Murderers," with a picture of these young men, was a massive stance.
With growing interest around the case from both the media and the public, pressure was on the newly elected Labour administration to take action. By the summer of 1997, the new Home Secretary, Jack Straw, met with the Lawrences, and soon after, the Home Office announced a judicial inquiry into the police's handling of the case.
This inquiry will have full powers to compel the attendance of witnesses to give evidence under oath, and if they fail to do so, to punish them as if it were a contempt of court.
The inquiry, led by retired High Court Judge Sir William Macpherson, sat for 59 days to hear evidence from 88 witnesses and produced more than 100,000 pages of documents.
At the heart of this inquiry is the allegation from the Lawrences and their lawyers that racism permeated the police investigation into Stephen's death and permeates the society in which it happened. So it's become a touchstone for the black community, and the outcome could point to the direction of the future of race relations in Britain.
The gang came to give evidence at the public hearing, having been told they will face prosecution otherwise. A huge crowd gathered outside the hearing, hoping to get a chance to see them take the stands.
At the inquest, the 5 suspects refused to answer questions. The inquest jury ruled Stephen had been unlawfully killed in a completely unprovoked racist attack.
Tensions between the police, the public and the suspects reached boiling point outside the court, and the inquiry was adjourned for 3 hours after police fired CS gas on protesters. The men spat and hit out at the crowd, whilst police escorted them back to their vehicles. In 1999, 2 years after the inquiry began, Macpherson made 70 recommendations and delivered a damning final verdict.
he concluded in his really landmark report that the Metropolitan Police Service was indeed institutionally racist. These 70 kind of overarching recommendations were presented to the Metropolitan Police Force, and the Metropolitan Police Force, to be honest, has been having a very complicated time engaging with this.
The chairman of the inquiry, Sir William Macpherson, repeatedly challenged Sir Paul about widespread instinctive racism within the force, but Sir Paul continually rebutted that suggestion.
I find it difficult after 5 years for the Commissioner to still be saying that he felt that there was no racism or corruption involved in Stephen's case. So if that wasn't racism and it wasn't corruption, I still haven't given the answer as to why Stephen's killers are still walking free.
The inquiry prompted some serious changes within the police force and led to the Race Relations Amendment Act in 2000 that strived to eliminate discrimination and promote racial equality.
But the problem of racism is it's so deeply woven into the fabric of our society that it is by no means a simple thing to resolve.
The inquiry may have shone light on institutional racism, but it didn't bring the result the Lawrence family so desperately wanted: the conviction of their son's murderers.
In the 11 years since, there have been 3 murder investigations, 2 police reviews and a public inquiry, yet his killers still remain free. Now the Crown Prosecution Service says it's unlikely the case will ever be solved.
But then in 2005, double jeopardy, the rule preventing suspects being tried twice for the same crime, was scrapped. Something Macpherson had recommended in his report 6 years earlier. But with no new evidence, this offered the Lawrence family little hope.
At every turn, the Lawrence case makes history. They literally challenged every step of the way, and whatever obstacle was in the place, statute, law and so on and so forth, they just overturned it.
A tiny spot of blood found on the collar of Dobson's jacket has a 1 in a billion chance of not belonging to Stephen. Other fibres from the dead teenager's clothing were allegedly found on a multicoloured cardigan.
Using the latest forensic technology, new evidence was found during a cold case review of Lawrence's murder that tied 2 of the previously acquitted suspects to the case. In 2011, the trial of Gary Dobson and David Norris for Lawrence's murder begins in light of the new evidence.
It took a long time for justice to ride out in the Lawrence case. Doreen watched the many suspects in her son's murder walk free from courts and inquiries. 19 years later, only 2 of them have been convicted. A failure, she says, of politicians as well as the police.
It was 19 years later, 19 years, let me say that again, before Dobson and Norris were in prison. So there are 2 things about that are extraordinary. One is it took 19 years for them to be found, brought to court again and charged and found guilty. And 2 is that 19 years later, Baroness Lawrence was still as resilient and as committed to this as she was 19 years previously.
We pay tribute to Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence's courage and dignity. They have contributed to major changes within policing, the law, and indeed within society as a whole.
Doreen Lawrence continued to campaign for justice for her son, as well as for other victims of racist crime. In 2013, Doreen was awarded the title of Baroness for her relentless work within the community.
She has been, really embedded in the psyche of this nation because of the work that she's done and the sacrifice she's paid. It's hard to explain it in terms of what it looks like, but it was in a way it was our own. It was our probably the most important criminal justice struggle in terms of the black story in this country in the last however many years.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
Policing has long been a focal point for concerns over racial injustice in the UK. And despite changes sparked by the Lawrence case and the landmark Macpherson inquiry, black people and ethnic minorities in Britain are still disproportionately represented when it comes to police checks, imprisonment, and deaths in custody.
We need to remember that the UK is not innocent.
We are a physical representation of our support for George Floyd. We are a physical representation of our support for Stephen Lawrence.
I think there is a very challenging conversation to be had about race and a challenging conversation to have about racism. I think there is enough evidence to suggest that racism is in the DNA of this nation.
All right, that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. Remember, if you missed any of our previous episodes, please go to Bloomberg QuickTake on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube to catch them all there.
And for a daily recap of the day's top stories, visit www.quicktake.video. Thanks for watching.